you embroider?
I have many skills.
What the hell are you doing?
Somebody has to save our skins.
Thank God we're hot chicks with superpowers.
Welcome to our maiden podcast for the FemiNerd Files. We're starting out with a group that we are calling the FemiNerd Files Roundtable, where we'll just have an open chat about different things going on. And we are a pop culture podcast. We're not the first pop culture podcast, and we're not even the first pop culture podcast with a feminist, mostly queer perspective. But we are all individuals here. We all have unique opinions, and we're here to share them with you. I am Beckah.
I'm Jené.
I'm Monica.
And Joy.
And welcome. Okay, we will jump right in. We all saw A Wrinkle in Time last night, and we all felt very positively about it. There are some things that we want to discuss and different opinions, but we just want to start out talking about how beautiful this movie was.
Yeah, I really was in love with the visuals. And I think one of the things I've been craving a lot in movies in general is just like the saturation of color. Like I feel that for years and years and years, it's like grayscale and gritty and dark. And our world is so bright and colorful. And, and I just felt like it captured that. And I think I read something about the saturation of color, how it was very purposeful and intentional. And I was just blown away by it.
I wasn't sure how to think of it at first, just because, I watch visuals all day and I watch a lot of dark content. And it's just like, whoa, shocking. Oh, yeah, that's the world right now. And it's shockingly beautiful, and that's what it is. And I feel like we have numbed ourselves and dulled our color. And that's what this whole movie is about, is like shining your light. And it was gorgeous.
Yeah, or just sort of like even the set design of like the household.
Oh my God.
The backyard too.
Like the garden and
the wind chimes that were playing. It just seems so magical. Also,
or just even the skin tones. Like a lot of times skin tones are dulled in a lot of movies. And I felt like everyone seemed so vibrant. And even though there was dealing with some dark content or dealing like with fear and insecurity and things like that, they didn't show it through the color. They used other methods to do it, which I thought was a really cool artistic choice.
Absolutely. I think one thing that stood out to me was I feel like Ava DuVernay does this in Queen Sugar, which if you haven't seen, you should. She spends a lot of time focusing on people's faces just close-ups of faces where you really get to see someone. And to me, that was all about visibility and representation, because too, a lot of these characters, especially Meg, don't necessarily see themselves the way that they think they're being seen or the way that they should be seen. So being able to just relish in the colors of these different skin tones and these different costumes, and just looking at someone for who they are for an extended period of time, just relishing that, I think was absolutely wonderful.
I agreed. And they did it with every character. Mrs. What's-It, that was Oprah Winfrey's character, right?
No, that's she's Mrs. Witch.
Mrs. Witch. See, they all get like combobulated. But yeah, just like even like the size of her and the costuming. But there were so many moments where it was just like her face, and you can see like the care she had for the people that she was with, and the care that she had for Meg. And you can also see her as like, I don't want to give her the answer, and just let her figure it out. So I thought that the face acting was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And for what character Mrs. Witch really is, she is actually all of them. They're like these old beings, but they all have trouble with words in the book. So to have it translated through facial expressions is perfect, because like, how do you translate that?
And I think that was one thing that I kind of wanted a little bit more about, was that barrier of language.
yeah.
I needed that a little bit more, especially, now I'm going to get the names wrong again. Who? Mrs. Who.
Yes.
I felt I could have had more of her in there because she always had such.
I relate to Mrs. Who.
Yeah.
A lot.
And because she was always, I don't know, I had such a connection to her in the books. There was just something about her that she was my favorite, like, part of them, and trying to, and also too the trying to explain the Tesseract and like the ant and the folding. I really miss that scene in the book.
Yeah, that wasn't actually in the movie.
No.
They showed
it was
in the previews.
visually it was in the Murray's presentation.
Right.
So like when they were talking, it was shown in the presentation that was going on behind them.
Right.
But yeah, I missed Meg being able to explain that.
The actual wrinkling
Right.
Which I think Mrs. Whatsit does in the book
with her dress.
skirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt like the introduction of Mrs. Whatsit and Mrs. Who was very rushed.
Yeah.
I did
We
too.
didn't really get a sense of who they were, and so that's where I felt like I kind of missed Mrs. Who being more involved and trying harder to express herself, but she doesn't have her own words. She has to use
Other people's words. And I liked what she did, but yeah, when Mrs. Whatsit was introduced, it was very jarring.
Well, because
Which makes sense. I mean, the event is jarring, but it was very quick, and we didn't really get a sense of, this visitation is going to set these events.
Yeah, and then I think that's why, like, with the milk scene at the very beginning, because if I remember in the book, there was like a quick mention of like the garden and a couple of the characters, and so I was expecting things to be just kind of placed in real quick.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to see what was on the cutting floor too, like what was filmed and then what had to be taken in and out. Because I still think overall it really worked well for it, but there's a couple of scenes that I wish would have been placed throughout the story.
And especially like being a super fan of the book and everything. I even watched the 2004 TV movie several times.
Oh, I know. Oh gosh, that movie.
Yeah.
I do think it's such an improvement from that.
It definitely is. I mean, yeah. The one thing I liked about the 2004 version, I did like that Meg. You know, I thought she was an update at that time. And now we have this even awesomer update, and it's like, oh, wow. But I feel like anyone who does make these movies tries to be as careful as possible to just keep the spirit of the movie.
And that's the hard thing, I think, in general. That's really hard to do. And I always have to tell myself that because I can be kind of a butthead in terms of like book to movie adaptations. Right. But it's just such a different medium, and kind of letting go of like what one medium translates into the other can be really hard for me. Right. And so a lot of times, like, well, and I know we'll talk about that eventually later, but why I really enjoyed Annihilation is that I didn't read the book, and I had no idea what I was expecting. And I think
The movie's better than the book.
Oh.
Just so you know.
Good to know. Well, that's really awesome. Because, yeah, it's just, I think this really, and I think that's why I've stopped, like, looking at criticisms, stopped watching previews, is that so many people, I think, color the way you're supposed to watch a film based on what they say about it. Right. And so just having like that pure experience by yourself with a movie.
Absolutely. I think I used to be the same way. I used to be so judgmental about movie adaptations. And now, again, I recognize it's a different medium. So I just have to say, okay, does this feel like the book? You know, is the story the same? The plot may be changed, but it has to feel the same. So like the Lord of the Rings films, I feel like capture the books very well, but The Hobbit does not, because it is no longer about the same story.
Right.
And so the thing that I was missing in this adaptation of the film was when they went to Camazotz. Thank you. I can never get that right. I felt like I really missed, like when they go into that neighborhood and the kids are bouncing the ball. I was waiting for the kid to drop the ball.
Yeah.
So
we were talking about that too.
So that it was almost not the rhythmic bouncing that was freaky. It was like the consequence of someone getting out of that rhythm. So when they went into the beach scene rather than the kind of city
The central intelligence.
going to central intelligence.
Yeah, it lost that.
There was no fear. I would have liked to seen more of the people that live there and how they were dealing with their fear and like reporting one another and this kind of having to go get what's that called? Where you get
brainwashed.
Well, basically, reconditioned.
Reconditioned.
Where you get reconditioned. So I was kind of expecting to see a little bit more of that, and like we were talking about earlier, there was like no real point of why Mr. Murray was there and as a captive. It's like,
And
why was he a threat?
Why was the it keeping him?
And because basically in the book, it's because Mr. Murray would not. He resisted. They bring up that word a lot too, resistance, which is interesting.
I also think he's a doctor.
And Dr. Murray, Professor Murray, maybe.
They're both doctors. Both parents are. So
Dad Murray. But he resisted the it, which was why he was held captive, and that wasn't super clear.
Yeah, and also the idea of Charles Wallace, like in the book too, it's like the it wanted Charles Wallace, because like even in the other books after it, like he's in many ways the protagonist, and it's kind of interesting. And Meg is like this side character in many ways. Like that's the story we get everything from. She's the one who narrates it, and so I was expecting that to be explained a little bit more too. And I felt like it kind of grabbed Charles Wallace a little too quickly, like that. Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, because the movie ended up being like 2 hours. I felt like we were there for a while.
I think it was less.
Less?
It felt less.
It's because we tested.
Oh, we tested
while we were watching the movie.
We'll have to look up the time. Because I don't know. It's just, and it's like, how much can you put in a film too sometimes? But that's what's nice about that medium of a book is you have time for things to kind of, bleh.
Yeah.
Whatever that word is.
Yeah, I felt like there could have been more time
On camera.
Sort of capturing Charles Wallace, because Charles Wallace is so brilliant and intuitive about his surroundings that he sort of just fell into it really quickly.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, in the book, he fights it much more, and Calvin's a part of that too,
and he's like the pure light kind of character.
Yeah, he's the Carol Ann.
So our minion Lauren showed that it is 1 hour and 49 minutes.
So it could have been.
I feel robbed.
We could have put some more into that, maybe.
I feel robbed, Disney.
Have you noticed movies are starting to get towards those times, like almost close to 2 hours?
Yeah, 2.5 to 3.
Yes.
Yeah, especially for the big epics.
Yeah, I think
All
they
the
could have added
superhero
they could have added some stuff to it then.
Yeah.
And speaking
But
of,
it's also a kid movie, so
Oh, right.
that's true.
Kids don't want to sit there for 2.5 hours, I guess.
or maybe not. Do you disagree?
Speaking of Charles Wallace, I also felt that in the book, which I read a few months ago, so I don't remember every single detail, but I also kind of interpreted his being captured by the it was in part because he doesn't really have a relationship with his father. He was a baby when Mr. Murray disappeared. And so
Dr. Murray, Dad Murray,
Mr. Dad Murray, yes. When Dad Murray left, that Meg is there to rescue her father, and Charles Wallace is almost there to help and to experience this form of travel and this new way of experiencing things. And that's partly why he was captured so easily, because
he had an ego.
He didn't have the relationship that Meg had. Mm-hmm. And so, that's why Meg ends up having to be the hero, because she's the one that has these relationships that is what brings her to victory.
Well, that's interesting, because that makes a lot of sense, because, we never really consider it as like the way Charles Wallace is presented. In some ways, we forget that, like, I'm sure he has abandonment issues with his dad, or like he's never really gotten to know him or meet him, and
there's a disconnect.
There's this pain that's been like lingering for 4 years in the family, and he disappeared right after he came So they don't really explore that or say that explicitly in the film, but maybe that's part of what was able to take him over, was that like kernel of doubt of like this.
That's interesting, the word you use, disconnect, you know, because that is, Meg is kind of the glue to all the characters. And, you know, in order to fight it is all about connection. It's all about light. It's all about love.
Yeah, how we connect in the universe.
Even though Charles Wallace is this genius protagonist, he hasn't been here long enough to really have those concrete connections.
Oh, yeah.
And I know I might be jumping around, but it just strikes me now, like the idea of when Mrs. Who says the wound is where the light comes in, like, and Charles Wallace is actually being cracked, and there's like light coming out, and sort of this idea of, and I think that's one thing I really appreciated about the film. It wasn't like a love will conquer all.
Right.
It was more about, there is darkness and there is fear, and
It is what it is.
And we have faults, but just because we have faults and fear and darkness doesn't mean we can't like thread light into the world. And I thought that was like a really beautiful message that I really, really loved.
Which makes me miss the character Aunt Beast. You know, Aunt Beast wasn't there for a second. You know, when they're testing, they're like, "Oh, look, it's Aunt Beast." I'm like, nah, that's all we get.
Wait, I didn't even notice that. When was it happening?
It was when the Happy Medium, played by Zach Galifianakis, was
Great
helping
choice
Meg
of character.
was looking, and they were going through all these different things, and like for a second they show Aunt Beast, or like, what's the name of the planet that Aunt Beast is from?
It's a similar planet to. It's close by.
Yeah,
Amazons. I can't remember.
And they look like elephants. Actually, they look like elephants with like these trunk legs and everything.
Okay.
And you hear someone say, "Oh, look, there's Aunt Beast," you know, and that's all we get. But on that world and that species, they can't see. They can't hear.
They can't. They don't understand what seeing something is. They just have
They know everything. They
what
know
it is.
everything is just as is.
Yeah, they just know what things are.
They're the ultimate Taoist.
Yeah. They know what it is without seeing. They don't see difference. They don't see sameness. They just see what is, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I miss the Aunt Beast
I know I
thing too.
got off on tangent on Aunt Beast, but that's kind of like what you were saying with like, you know, just trying to see things as they are, and how everything is valuable, including our faults, and that has always been the theme for A Wrinkle in Time, I feel.
So
and just a little bit more about that Aunt Beast section is in the book. They actually, the father, they abandon Charles Wallace. Right. And then they go to this other, they test her to this other planet where Aunt Beast is, and
Meg's
so they're
mad
all,
at him.
Yeah, so, and Meg nearly dies because it almost kills her, and they all needed this time with Aunt Beast to.
How about breathing?
And they all needed to have this time with Aunt Beast to heal and get to know each other. Like Meg is dealing with the anger of her dad abandoning her, and then the anger of feeling like she is helpless, and Aunt Beast helps her realize her potential. Well, there's a lot to talk about potential in the book and the movie, but Aunt Beast helps her realize her potential, whereas in the movie she just sort of realizes it on herself by herself. When she talks about her faults.
Totally awesome.
It is also good.
We could have used another 40 minutes, Disney.
We could, but it was. I could go either way. I think they did an okay job, but Aunt Beast, I remember as a kid, I really liked that section of the book.
I think since we were talking about how hard it is to interpret kind of introspective moments in books, I think that would have been a really difficult scene to portray visually.
Probably true, because in the 2004 when they did it, it was kind of creepy.
Aunt Beast was creepy.
It was kind of creepy.
Yeah,
because she's got tentacles and.
We should talk about the happy medium, how they portrayed that, because that was completely
absolutely
different than. I thought it was really cool with the balancing of the rocks and finding the balance and relaxing to be able to see and feel everything honestly. I thought that was really cool. I didn't didn't get any of that from the book before. It was just, you have a seer and you let the seer do their job. Right. And you're not doing a job. So I thought that was a really cool visual. And I thought Zach Galifianakis, I can't say his last name. and this cute little man bun.
Yeah, I know. And I thought it was interesting because a lot of the times the happy medium is portrayed as like a non-binary character.
Yeah.
And at first I wasn't sure how I felt about them not doing this, but I really liked it because we need that balance and we need positive male figures in movies. And for the first time, I didn't feel like, it didn't make me mad. Like, I appreciated it.
Well, and he had so much heart, too. Yeah. And I was, like, really surprised by how quickly I liked him. And that's really hard to do in a movie. Like, oh, my God, this guy is, like, has these feelings for this character and is, like, really invested in this child. Mm-hmm. And, like, he's crying for her and crying for what's happening. And even though it was very quick, had a very big impact.
Yeah.
And when Meg hugged him at the end, mm-hmm. I thought that was such a great moment because she was so unbalanced, and so he helped her gain this balance in order to understand how she was feeling, and then she was able to express that with that hug, which I thought was so great.
Or like putting his arms on her, like showing him how to hug, and him just kind of going with it, which I also thought was kind of one of those, again, like this movie has all these really tiny, lovely moments of like big impact. And it was like so small, but it was like he was just willing to go there. Right. Or like,
and it was like a consent too, like, please hug me.
Yeah. So I really loved that moment.
I kind of want to ask you all about the scene with the it. I personally liked the interpretation of kind of being within the neural pathways rather than the image of like a big brain like resting on a bed or a table or whatever. But that was a really interesting scene. It was pretty dark and a little scary when the tendrils were like grabbing Meg and throwing her around. And then having her kind of see her alternate self. What did you all think about that scene and how it brought the denouement kind of to a head?
Oh, in that scene, I want to go ahead and, like, this is the same thing, but when Meg sees her ideal self, this whole self-image thing, like we want to be somebody else who we're not. And, and she just wants to be somebody else. And then she finally realized, oh, no, I don't want to be that. But as an ethnic person myself, seeing Meg, who is this girl of color with curly hair, looking at her ideal self of this like westernized, straightened hair, Disney, how do you say that?
Persona?
I mean, yeah, is it a persona? Like,
I think Disney has that. The way she looked is kind of typical ingenuine.
Yeah, and it's stereotypical like look of like what Disney young teenagers look like. But to like have her look at that and say, that is not my ideal self. I am my ideal self. That really hit me hard because, growing up as a person of color from another country, especially the Philippines, we are told that pale skin is better, and, don't stay in the sun because you get too brown or you'll get ugly. That was just really affirming for me, for sure. And I know there's a whole bunch of other, because the original Meg in the book, she was redhead. She felt the same way. This is an ongoing theme in young women books, like Anna Green Gables, same thing. She wanted dark raven hair, because red was ugly. Just like the self-hate that girls grow up in is a common theme, and it's time to break out of it.
Well, or even the way they portray, like when she was looking at that ideal self, the way the actress or the actor,
when she was acting,
and just sort of how being different would completely alter the DNA of her in a way. That like it was so well acted, and it was like creepy. It was like you wouldn't be you. Like, what makes you you? And it kind of reminds me of that scene with Mrs. Who. Is like, think about all the expanse of the universe and all the things that had to happen to congeal in this one moment that created you.
That was amazing.
You know, and then just kind of like thinking about that, and the hair was mentioned a lot throughout the film, which I thought was amazing.
And it is a whole image thing. I mean, even her neighbor, who was like, you know, the ideal, you know, she had her own problems. She had written on her mirror like, you can't eat this kinds of food and you're fat and stuff like that. I mean, everyone has those
self-hatred, translated to being a bully.
Yeah, and I always love it, and this is from the book to now, Calvin like saying aberrations is what makes us beautiful.
Oh yeah, that was so good.
Calvin is a really great character.
I was swooning over Calvin.
I think the movie did a really good job with having him be this background support for Meg. He wasn't this like typical male hero character who's rushing in and trying to save the girl. He really just hangs back the whole time and just waits for Meg's instruction and suggestion.
He never questions her.
And I don't know if I interpreted this strangely, but the point when they get separated from Charles Wallace and they're at the stream, you know, they slowly have been losing layers of clothing.
Oh yeah, I noticed that too.
So I was thinking about that in terms of their relationship, in terms of them sharing things with each other and kind of stripping down the barriers and really just seeing each other just in the open air. And again,
even that like quick glimpse of him like trying to put his other shirt on, I was like, I don't need that.
Exactly. And
I did have a moment there where I was like, oh, I hope this doesn't mean he's going to take his shirt off of it.
I know, just like how many legs is going to eat?
I mean, because I was like, wait, please don't do that.
Yeah, and he didn't.
And he didn't. So.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Well, also too, like, it's interesting that you say that, because like a lot of times I feel like hoodies, especially, I don't know, I remember being in middle school and the hoodies was like my blanket. It was my shield. It was my way of, I don't want anyone to see me. And I thought that was, I'm really fascinated about hoodies in general and how people are starting to put that in films and really, and maybe they're thinking about it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's really interesting. She got rid of her security blanket. And so they're just like being very vulnerable with one another. Talking about going back to her, like her faults and like that being a really important thing, like her suspicion and not trusting and being cautious really saved her in Camelot. Camelot. It's like Camelot, but it's like, ooh, maybe it is Camelot, but it's the underbelly of Camelot.
The upside down.
The upside down. The upside down of Camelot. So yeah. Nerd. Anyway, yeah, all these other allusions we're bringing to it.
I really also loved the very last Tesser. Because we got to see Meg struggling with the Tesser and feeling trapped and feeling like she didn't know what was happening and feeling suffocated. And at the end, she just has this amazing, I'm going to start crying, this amazing journey where it's full of light and it's joyous and glorious. And she gets to finally experience the beauty of this whole journey. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to end that part of the journey. And she gets to experience it on her own because she creates it and she jumps in head first. And I thought that was so beautiful.
Can we talk about the light a bit? And this,
the what?
Can we talk about the light?
The light.
Yes.
And this ongoing theme. This ongoing theme in a lot of the movies that we've been seeing. So we have A Wrinkle in Time, we have Annihilation, we have Star Wars The Last Jedi, and we have Wonder Woman and
Black Panther.
Panther.
Yeah, I kept thinking about Last Jedi during this movie about Rose Tico and what she says. We don't win by destroying what we hate, but by saving what we love. And I kept thinking about that when Meg was saving Charles Wallace by, just repeatedly, I love you and you love me, and that's our connection. We have this, and that's what destroys what this outside darkness, which also made me think of the Buffy scene with Xander and Dark Willow, which I digress. But it's just... and we talked about this too a little bit about the light, and that it tends. What I'm noticing is that this sort of saving the world with the light tends to be a more feminine ideal. That when there's a male protagonist or hero, he doesn't usually see those options. It's a little more violent. It's a little more forceful. Whereas the women, the female, the feminine tends to be more.
Which is happening in a lot
about the love and the connection and saving as many people instead of destroying something, but saving something.
Which is happening a lot in these themes with these powerhouse women movies, Ghostbusters even. It was all about saving your love. So.
Yeah. And the difference between then Meg and her dad, how they each approach the it and the black thing. They don't really call it the black thing in the movie, but and her parents had that whole conversation too at the beginning, where the dad is like, no, we got to go do this, and I don't care that no one understands, and it's all about the science. And
nobody's ready. Nobody's ready to hear this.
Nobody's ready to hear. Yeah, and she's like, they're not ready, and it doesn't mean it's not important.
It doesn't mean that we're not great either.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that we're not great. So it was definitely a difference in approach to science and connection, and where love fits into science, which I really, really love that.
Well, and that's why I really wanted to talk. I know like the light, but also like the sound and the science aspect of it.
Oh yeah, so the somatics.
Yeah, the somatics.
Sonoluminescence. Oh my god, and a star in a jar. Holy geek out!
I don't know what those words mean.
I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay. Anyway. Okay, Jené and I'll take this.
Yeah.
one.
We'll break this down. So, kind of going with their conversation and science, and I think that's one thing that like, as scientists sometimes forget, is that they get caught up in what they know and understand and the way they relate to the world. And sometimes science, it's not about the science, it's about how people communicate science that I think is what's the problem. Is that you have a lot of people saying this is the truth, and I know this is truth because of the scientific process, but no one knows what the scientific process is. It's magic to them. And I thought that was what was really interesting about the movie, is that there is like this sort of relationship of the science being mystical in a way. It's a fantasy story, but it's also a science fiction story. And there's a lot of like real relatable science in terms of bending and folding time, of using sound, and like sound especially, that there's a lot more
kind of like frequency.
Yeah, well, not just like from like the metaphorical aspect of finding the right frequency, but also there's so much science that's really talking about the importance of sound in like space travel, the DM drive of like using sound to propel ships, or using sound to fold space to be able to travel. I think it's really important too to show Meg and her mother being very scientifically minded. Like, we don't ever get that.
It's not magic, it's physics.
Right, it's physics, but we never get these like lovely portrayals of women of color in science roles.
Absolutely.
Or even like Meg not being like a stereotypically portrayed woman of colors. Like, she got to be vulnerable and vulnerable and awkward and all of those different things, and really seeing like she knew all this science, knew all this physics. She had that was part of what her parents handed down to her, and it saved her in a lot of situations. And I thought it was really cool, just this beautiful blend of science and magic.
Yeah, and also with people of color, women, in STEM, it's like, even in the end, when he comes back, he goes to his wife and it was just like, your formula worked.
Yeah.
It was yours.
So the infinitesimally small thing is what got me to shake hands with the universe.
Right.
And I also thought that was also a lovely, beautiful marriage of ideas, is that especially in science.
Planets.
Cells, planets.
Same thing.
Especially with science, a lot of times too, it's like there's this constant concept of like everything that's out in the universe. The larger and more expansive we get, we can find in the most tiny subatomic particle of a cell. And so maybe the answer to the universe, the answer to time travel and folding space is like the DNA like inside ourselves. And I thought that was
So Sagan-y.
yeah.
I think that would be a really good segue into our next roundtable where we talk about annihilation.
Yeah.
Dun dun dun. Yes.
Cause there's 100 billion galaxies that stretch across the sky, filled with constellations, planets, moons, and stars. And still the universe extends to a place that never ends, which is maybe just inside a little jar.
It's a great big universe and we're all really puny. We're just tiny little specks about the size of Mickey Rooney. Though we don't know how we got here, we're an important part here. It's a big universe.